Firstly, there's a recap of several stories that created a poser, not a conundrum or a riddle or an enigma, but a poser. But let's see what happens when we make those stories into an equation. This plus this equals. The first story was about that couple who had a small son who was deathly ill. So they called a great Sufi saint to his bedside. And when the Sufi saint stood by the bedside, he bent over and spoke a few words. And then he turned to the parents and said, "Now your child will be healed." But there was a man standing there as a witness, and he scoffed at the Sufi saint and said, "How can a few muttered words heal?" The Sufi saint, a gentle being, feigned anger, and he said, "You're a fool. You don't understand anything." And the man's face became red and he clenched his fist. The Sufi saint looked at him and said, "If a few words can bring red and anger to you, why then cannot a few words heal?" The second story was about that king who had 4 men brought before him because they'd committed a heinous crime. And to the first one he said, "Your head will be lopped from your shoulders." And the second one he said, "You will go to jail." And to the third he said, "You are banished from my kingdom." And to the fourth he said, "I cannot believe that you have done such a thing." The 3 men were punished, as said, but the very next day the 4th man was found dead. And finally, is a story already told, but it's about that nomadic Bedouin prince who was rich in animals and gold, but such was his generosity of spirit that all his money and his wealth was depleted, so that he became almost penurious, penniless. The only thing in his possession was a she-camel that carried his tents from place to place. But one day when he was encamped with his family, the Sultan of the realm, in the company of his chief advisor, in disguise, came to the door of his tent seeking hospitality. Now, when the Sultan entered the tent and was greeted by the prince in the usual way that he greeted all travelers, he turned to the screen behind which was his wife and other women, and said, "Woman, entertain our guests, give them our hospitality." But the reply that came from behind the screen was, "There is not even a grain of flour left in our coffers to give any entertainment or hospitality." So the emir said, "Well, go to our neighbors and ask for a cup of flour." with which to provide some food. So the wife went to the neighbor's house, but the neighbor said to her, and this was related to the prince, "We are poor. Let he who wants to give hospitality and owns a she-camel do what is necessary." So after the prince heard these words, he went out and took his sword and slaughtered his she-camel and placed it in a pot to entertain his guests. Now, when the Sultan saw what was being done, he said to the prince, "This your only she-camel, what will you do to carry your tents?" And the prince says, "That is the business of God." And so they were entertained. But then at the end of the feasting, the Sultan said to the prince, "Come to the mosque on Saturday, and your she-camel will be replaced." So that Saturday, Emir Hamid went to the mosque, and he asked, "Where is the Sultan?" And the Sultan was pointed out to him kneeling on his prayer rug and being told, "The Sultan is seeking blessings from God." And the prince thought to himself, "Oh yes, he's probably asking for my she-camel." And then he thought to himself, "But I can do that for myself." And so taking up his prayer rug, he left the mosque and went to a small hill nearby, where, putting his prayer rug down, he knelt down and said his prayers. But when his prayers were finished, he took his staff to help to lever himself up from his kneeling position, when he found that his staff went deeper and deeper and deeper into the sand. So when he arose, he dug in that place, and he found a cavern, and in that cavern were containers of gold coins, such as would be able to ransom a king's kingdom. So quickly Prince Emir Hamid brought his tent and placed it over the cavern. But after this time he was again rich beyond measure, and continued to give out his largesse and hospitality. But then one day the Sultan said to himself, "Oh, remember that prince that we visited that killed his she-camel for us? He did not come to the mosque on Saturday. Let's go and see how he's faring." So, in the company with his advisor, they went to find Emir Hamid. But as they approached where they believed he was camped, there were fields of camels and sheep and horses. And when they came to the tent where Prince Emir Hamid lived, they found it draped with Persian rugs and chandeliers and all kinds of trappings of wealth. And so they asked him, where did his wealth arise from? And Prince Emir Hamid told the whole story about what had happened. But then they were given a repast of great delicacies. And after they had feasted, the advisor leant over to the Sultan and whispered in his ear, "This man has more wealth than even the greatest Sultan or king in all the lands. Surely he will try to usurp your kingdom, your throne. You must dispose of him." And the Sultan said, "But he has given us such hospitality. How can we do that?" Again the advisor said, "He is a danger to your kingdom." So the Sultan asked, "What shall I do?" So the advisor whispered to him, "In the morning, tell him that you had a dream and you dreamt, 'Ow, ow, ow.' And surely he will say to you that you dreamt of a dog. And this is an insult that deserves him to lose his head." So the next morning, when they gathered, the Sultan said to Prince Emir Hamid, "Last night I had a dream. I had a dream in which 'ow, ow, ow' arose. What is its meaning?" And the prince looked at him and said, "Well, 'ow' is the word for down, and this means light, the light that gives all of life. The second 'ow' means down, and that means air, that the Great One allows the birds to fly and men to live. And the third means sow, which the meaning of evil, evil that the Great One needs to eradicate." And with that, the Sultan took out his sword and lopped off the head of his advisor. And after this time, he would not be separated from Prince Emir Hamid. He wanted him by his side as his chief advisor. From a poser, these first two stories to an equation. This story plus this story equals that. The story of Prince Emir Hamid. What is it that arises in you? No longer as a poser, but as an answer to where it is that we rest when we become still. Having traversed that phase of khidmat, as called by the Sufis, service, like the exploration of doing good that we did for some time. What is it that arises for you? As to where you stand, where do you rest in every moment? No longer in service, no longer a do-gooder, but with a knowledge that allows us to stand ever present and alert. Knowing. Knowing what? What does this story tell us?